command figures, where power becomes legacy.
Hello, we are back here with Command Figures.
It is good to be back. And today, we're not just looking at a stack of history books.
No.
We're not even just looking at a collection of dusty old treaties. We are, I think, looking at a crime scene.
A crime scene is exactly the right word for it.
Yeah, and it's one that spans 2 continents, a century of what you could call deliberate silence, and a moral reckoning that is still causing tremors right now, today.
Absolutely. And to get us started, I want to pull up an image from our notes that it strikes a nerve. It feels incredibly recent because, well, it is. We're talking June 2020. We're in Antwerp, Belgium. The world is, locked down for the pandemic, but the streets are on fire with the Black Lives Matter protests following the death of George Floyd in the U.S.
It was a huge global moment, a moment of reckoning. But in Belgium, the focus wasn't on Confederate generals or, American figures. It was laser focused on one specific man.
Right. There's this statue in the Ekeren district of Antwerp. It's a man with a long, square beard, looking very regal, very authoritative. And the protesters, they didn't just march past it. They doused this bronze figure in red paint.
To look like blood.
They set it on fire. And eventually, the local authorities had to come in with a crane to just, unceremoniously yank this king off his pedestal and cart him away to a warehouse.
And that was the statue of King Leopold II.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And looking at that image, the king just dangling there from a crane strap, you have to ask, why this specific figure? Statues of Columbus and Colston were coming down elsewhere. But in Belgium, the rage was directed entirely at this one man. A man who, and this is the part that gets me, never actually set foot in the territory he claimed to own.
That is one of the most staggering facts of this entire story. He owned a territory 76 times the size of Belgium, the Congo Free State, and yet he never visited. Not once.
Not one time.
Not one single time. He ran it entirely by remote control from a palace in Brussels. And yet his commercial policy, as he so euphemistically called it, led to a death toll that historians estimate at around 10 million people.
10 million. It's a number that is it's hard to even wrap your head around. It's a demographic catastrophe.
It is. And that's why the statue was removed. There was a petition by this group called Repair History that got tens of thousands of signatures in just a few days. They called him an executioner.
An executioner.
They pointed out that for 23 years, he treated the Congolese people essentially as chattels, as property for the production of rubber.
So today's deep dive is really a clash of personalities. We have Leopold II on one side, this, command figure of imperialism, the mastermind. But on the other side, we have the people who tried to stop him. The whistleblowers.
That's right. And this is where the story gets, I think, really compelling. We're going to be talking about a shipping clerk named E.D. Morel, who used basically data to expose a crime against humanity.
Just looking at spreadsheets.
It's just spreadsheets. We'll talk about Roger Casement, a diplomat turned revolutionary whose life, it reads like a Greek tragedy. And we'll talk about the missionaries who provided the on-the-ground evidence that made the world finally pay attention.
And we've got a clear mission for this deep dive. We're going to trace this chronologically. We'll start with what we're calling the Great Khan, how Leopold got the Congo in the first place, because it wasn't a standard invasion. Then we'll look at the Red Rubber Terror, the actual mechanics of the system. Then, the birth of modern humanitarian campaigning.
And we absolutely cannot forget the tragic end of Roger Casement, which takes us away from Africa and into the heart of World War I in Europe. It's a twist that it really complicates the hero narrative.
And finally, we'll bring it right up to the present day. Because one of the sources we have is this really interesting thesis on path dependency. It basically argues that the chaos in the Democratic Republic of Congo today, the M23 rebellion, the conflict over minerals, is literally running on the tracks that Leopold laid down in the 1880s.
Exactly. History isn't just the past, it's the architecture of the present. And to understand why the DRC is facing such struggles today, we have to go back and look at the foundation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Part 1, the Great Khan. I think a lot of people have this vague idea of colonialism, like it's a game of Risk. A country sends an army, they plant a flag, and they say, "This is mine now." But that's not really what happened here, is it?
Not at all. It was much, much more subtle and frankly, much more cynical. But before we even get to the Europeans, we need to correct a massive misconception.
Okay.
There's often this narrative in old history books that the Congo region was a vacuum or a dark continent before the white man arrived.
Right, the idea that it was just empty space waiting to be civilized.
Precisely. And our sources make it crystal clear that the region was actually home to intricate, connected chiefdoms and kingdoms. The Kingdom of Congo, for instance, had been interacting with Europeans since the 15th century.
Since the 1400s.
Yes. There were trade networks, there were legal systems, artistic traditions. This was a populated, functioning society. It was not a vacuum.
So not a blank slate.
Definitely not. But for Leopold II, it was a blank space on his map that he could fill with his own ambition. You have to understand Leopold's position in the 1870s. He was the king of the Belgians, but Belgium was a constitutional monarchy.
He called himself a prisoner of the Constitution, right? I read that in the notes.
He did. He chafed under it. He didn't have absolute power at home. He couldn't just pass laws or raise taxes on a whim. He was bored. And he was jealous.
Jealous of who?
He looked at the Dutch making a fortune in Java or the British in India, and he wanted that status. He wanted a colony. He was obsessed with the idea.
He wanted a slice of that imperial pie.
He wanted the whole bakery. He spent his days reading treatises on how to run a colony for profit. But the Belgian government just wasn't interested. They were a small, neutral country. They thought colonies were expensive money pits that required navies and armies they didn't have.
So the Belgian parliament basically says, no thank you. What does Leopold do?
He decides to go it alone. He decides to privatize imperialism. And this is where the Great Khan truly begins. In 1876, he convened this huge conference in Brussels, the Geographical Conference.
This was like the networking event of the century.
It really was.
Yeah.
He invited the world's most famous explorers, geographers, philanthropists, and he pitched them this grand idea of an International African Association.
The branding on that is incredible. It sounds so noble, so harmless.
That was the genius of it. It was branded as a scientific and humanitarian philanthropy project. The stated goals were to civilize the region, to open up scientific exploration, and this was the crucial part, to end the Arab slave trade that was happening in East and Central Africa.
So he wraps himself in the flag of humanitarianism. I'm not here to conquer. I'm here to liberate.
It was the ultimate cover story. He knew that if he went to the great powers and said, I want to conquer the Congo, the British and the French would shut him down immediately. But if he said, I want to save the Congo from slave traders, who could possibly object to that?
It's a Trojan horse.
It is, a massive one. But to make it work, he needed an operator on the ground. He couldn't go himself, so he hired Henry Morton Stanley.
Dr. Livingstone, I presume. That guy.
The very same. Stanley was the most famous explorer in the world at that time. He was a media celebrity, the equivalent of, I don't know, a modern-day astronaut. Leopold hired him, essentially, as his acquisition manager. He sent Stanley back to the Congo, not to explore, but to secure treaties.
And this is where we get into some real cloak and dagger stuff. I was reading in the notes about the secret codes they used in their letters. It reads like a spy novel.
It really does. Leopold was incredibly paranoid about the other great powers finding out his true intentions. In the correspondence between Leopold's circle, specifically with Henry Shelton Sanford, who was his man in Washington helping him woo the Americans, they used code names. Stanley was referred to as Achille.
Achille. Like the Greek hero?
Yes, and the United States.
What was the code for the U.S.?
The United States was Alice.
Alice. That's incredible. We need to get Alice on board. It sounds like a tea party, not the carving up of a continent.
It was a conspiracy. Stanley spent 5 years going up and down the Congo River. He signed over 450 treaties with local chiefs. Now, we have to pause on these treaties. These were not negotiations between equals.
What were the chiefs actually signing? I mean, could they read it?
No, absolutely not. The chiefs couldn't read the French legalese. Stanley would offer them trade goods, bolts of cloth, copper wire, bottles of gin. The chiefs likely thought they were signing a friendship pact, or maybe granting temporary trading rights, or perhaps an alliance against a rival chief.
But the text said something very, very different.
The text was explicit. It ceded absolute sovereignty and land ownership in perpetuity to the International African Association. Leopold was effectively buying a subcontinent for a few trunks of trinkets.
And while this is happening on the ground back in Europe, Leopold is playing this incredible diplomatic chess game to get these sham treaties recognized?
The colonial chess game, as one of our sources calls it. He was brilliant at playing the great powers against each other. It was a masterclass in manipulation.
So what was his move?
He went to the French and said, look, support my claim. If I ever go broke and have to sell the Congo, which he made sound very likely, I promise I'll give you the right of first refusal.
So the French are thinking, okay, this little king will probably fail, he'll go bankrupt, and then we get this huge territory without having to do any of the hard work.
Exactly. Then he goes to the British and the Germans. He tells them, listen, if the French get the Congo, you know what they'll do. They'll close it off with tariffs. But if I hold it, I promise free trade for everyone. No customs, no taxes, open commerce.
So he's promising free markets to the Germans and the British, and a future inheritance to the French. He's telling everyone what they want to hear.
And he told the Americans, Alice, that he was creating a confederation of free Negro republics modeled on Liberia.
Unbelievable.
He played to the American abolitionist sentiment. He framed it as this project of Black self-determination, all under his benevolent fatherly guidance. And it worked. The United States was actually the first major country to formally recognize Leopold's flag.
This all culminates in the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 85.
The moment where Europe carved up the continent, they literally sat around a table in Berlin, looked at a large map on the wall, and drew lines through societies and kingdoms they had never visited and knew nothing about.
And in the middle of that map, they recognized the Congo Free State.
Yes.
But the crucial distinction here, and we cannot stress this enough, is that it wasn't a Belgian colony, was it?
No. This is the key to all the horror that followed. It was the personal, private property of one man, King Leopold II. He was the absolute sovereign. It was a corporate state where he was the CEO, the board, and the king. He could make any law he wanted with no oversight.
So 1885, he has his land, he has his international recognition, he's promised free trade and humanitarianism. How do we get from that point to what is described in our sources as the Rubber Terror?
Well, the Great Khan hit a snag pretty quickly. Leopold had poured his entire personal fortune into acquiring the Congo, bribing journalists, paying Stanley, hosting conferences. He was on the verge of bankruptcy. And for the first few years, the Congo just wasn't making money.
What were they even trading at that point?
Mostly ivory. And ivory is valuable, but it's hard to scale. You have to hunt elephants, you have to transport these massive tusks. It wasn't covering the costs of the administration and the railway he was trying to build from the coast. He was getting desperate.
And then technology intervened.
History turns on these strange pivots. In 1888, over in Belfast, a man named John Boyd Dunlop invents the pneumatic tire.
The air-filled tire.
Right. Before this, wheels were solid wood or iron. Suddenly, you have the bicycle craze sweeping Europe and America. And then, just a few years later, the automobile starts to appear. The industrial world developed this insatiable, desperate hunger for rubber.
And the Congo was full of it.
It was one of the few places on Earth with vast reserves of wild rubber. It was like striking oil, but the oil was hanging from vines in the jungle.
Now, the notes mention a technical detail here that explained a lot of the suffering. These weren't rubber trees, like in Brazil, were they?
Correct. And this is so crucial to understanding the labor involved. In Brazil, you have hevea trees. You can tap them like a maple tree, catch the latex sap in a bucket, and the tree lives on. It's sustainable. In the Congo, the rubber came from Landolphia vines.
What's the difference?
Well, a Landolphia vine is this giant woody plant that coils up into the canopy of the rainforest, hundreds of feet up.
So you can't just cap it at the base?
No. To get the rubber, you often have to climb high into the trees and slash the vine all over. The sap drips out, but it coagulates really quickly. It dries on your skin. It's incredibly difficult, painful, dangerous work. And often, the quickest way to get a lot of rubber is to just cut the vine down completely, which kills it.
So you have a resource that gets harder and harder to find the more you harvest it.
Exactly. You have to go deeper and deeper into the forest, further from your village, every single time.
So Leopold has a high demand, a difficult resource to harvest, and he needs cash fast. This brings us to part 2, the Rubber Terror. What was the system? How did it work?
First, Leopold completely abandoned the promise of free trade. He issued a series of decrees declaring all vacant land to be the property of the state, which was him.
And how did he define vacant land?
Basically, anything that wasn't a hut or a small garden plot. So the entire forest, all the rivers, all the rubber vines, they all belonged to Leopold personally.
And he didn't just run it all himself. He leased it out like a franchise.
he created these concession companies like the ABIR, the Anglo-Belgian India Rubber Company. He gave them huge tracts of land and said, you have the monopoly on all rubber here. You can do whatever you need to do to get it. Just give me a 50% cut of the profits.
But how do you get the local population to do this dangerous, difficult work for basically no pay?
You don't ask, you force. The state imposed a labor tax. Since the Congolese people didn't use European currency, the state said, you owe us tax for the protection we're providing. You must pay that tax in a certain quota of rubber.
This is the forced labor part. It's slavery, just with a different name.
It was a hostage system. The agents of the concession companies, backed by Leopold's private army, the force public, would march into a village.
And the force public was? Who were these soldiers?
They were conscripted African soldiers, often from other regions, who were led by white European officers, mercenaries from all over Europe, really.
So what would they do when they arrived in a village?
They would round up the women and children and take them hostage. They would lock them in sheds, often with no food or water, in horrible conditions. Then they would tell the men of the village, your wives and children are in that shed. If you want to see them again, you must go into the forest and bring back your quota of rubber.
So the men are desperate. They run into the forest.
And if they didn't bring back enough, or if the rubber was of poor quality, the women were beaten, raped, or simply starved to death. The men were flogged with the...
Just your coat. That's the whip, right?
It was a whip made of dried, twisted hippo hide. The edges were sharp. It would cut the skin open like a knife. 100 lashes was a common punishment, which was often a death sentence.
And the specific detail that always comes up in the sources, the severed hands. We had to talk about that. Why was that happening? It sounds like pure sadism, but you're saying it was bureaucratic?
It was a chilling form of accounting. The white officers were terrified of mutiny. They didn't trust their black soldiers with modern rifles and ammunition. They were also incredibly stingy. They didn't want soldiers wasting expensive cartridges on hunting for food.
So they created a rule to control the bullets.
The rule was 1 cartridge, 1 hand. For every bullet a soldier fired, he had to bring back a severed right hand to prove that he had used the bullet to kill a rebel, meaning someone resisting the rubber collection.
So the hand was a receipt, a proof of purchase.
Exactly. But imagine the incentives this creates. What if a soldier misses his target? Or what if he uses a bullet to shoot a gazelle to feed his hungry squad? He is now short a bullet. He has to account for it.
So he needs a hand.
So he goes to a village and finds a living person, a woman, a child, an elder, someone who can't fight back, and he chops off their hand to present to his officer.
There are photos in the archives. They're almost unbearable to look at. There's one of a father just staring at the small, severed hand and foot of his 5-year-old daughter on a porch. It is absolute nightmare fuel.
It is the definition of a crime against humanity. And this wasn't an isolated incident. This was the system. This was how the quotas were met. This was how the rubber flowed to Antwerp to make tires for the new bicycles in London and New York.
And this is all happening deep in the interior, far, far away from the eyes of the world. But someone did notice. And this brings us to Eddy Morel.
Edmund Morel is such a fascinating, unlikely hero in this story. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a radical activist. He was a mid-level shipping clerk working for Elder Dempster in Antwerp.
He was a numbers guy. He was just looking at spreadsheets.
He was a data analyst before the term even existed. He sat on the docks in Antwerp and he watched the ships coming and going. He saw the ships arriving from the Congo. They were filled to the brim with raw rubber and ivory.
And value commodities.
Yeah.
Millions and millions of francs worth of goods.
Absolutely. And then he looked at the ships going back to the Congo. Now, if this was trade, as the Congo Free State claimed, you would expect those ships to be full of trade goods, cloths, tools, beads, things to pay the workers who harvested all that rubber.
But they weren't.
No. Morel looked at the manifests. The ships were leaving Belgium essentially empty of any commercial goods. Instead, they were carrying 3 specific things in huge quantities: guns, cartridges, and explosive.
Wow. So rubber comes in, guns go out. That's the entire equation.
Morel just did the simple deduction. He realized, if X amount of value is coming out of the country and basically 0 commercial value is going in, the only variable left to balance the equation is force.
He realized it wasn't trade at all. It was theft. Armed robbery on a continental scale.
He realized the Congo Free State wasn't a trading state. It was a military occupation and a slave labor system. The guns were there to force the rubber out. It was as simple and as brutal as that.
That is incredible detective work, just by looking at shipping manifests from a desk in Antwerp.
He said later that he felt he had stumbled upon a secret society of murderers, and he couldn't stay silent. He confronted his bosses at the shipping line. They basically told him to shut up and offered him a promotion and a raise to keep him quiet.
But he didn't take it.
No. In 1901, he resigned his comfortable job. He took a huge risk. He started his own newspaper called the West African Mail with one purpose: to blow the whistle on the Congo. He started publishing the data, the numbers, the manifests. He became a huge thorn in Leopold's side.
But Morel was in Europe. He had the data, the statistics, but statistics could be dry. To really move the public, he needed something more visceral. He needed an eyewitness.
And that's when he found Roger Casement.
Okay, so Casement is our next major figure in this command figures lineup. Who was he at this point in the story?
Roger Casement was an Irishman, but he was working for the British Consular Service. He was a veteran of Africa. He had spent most of his 20s there, what he called his African years. He'd been a surveyor, a volunteer. He had actually met Henry Morton Stanley back in the early days of the Congo.
So he knew the terrain. He wasn't some naive diplomat.
He knew the terrain, he spoke some of the languages, and he knew the people. By 1903, the British government was under increasing pressure from Morel's articles and from reports coming from Protestant missionaries. They needed to know if the rumors of these horrible atrocities were actually true. So they sent Casement, their consul based in Boma, to investigate.
And Casement didn't just sit in the Capitol and interview officials, did he?
No, he did something pretty much unprecedented for an official of his rank. He hired a little steamship, the Henry Reed, from some American missionaries, and he traveled hundreds of miles upstream into the interior, into the rubber-producing regions.
I can just imagine the scene. The humidity, the heat, the river winding deeper and deeper into the jungle, and he's stopping at these devastated villages.
And because he was traveling with the missionaries, people like Alice and John Harris, who were crucial to this story, the local people trusted him. They came out of the forest to talk to him. They showed him their wounds.
The missionaries were the other key whistleblowers here, right? They were on the ground.
Absolutely. They had been living there for years. They had seen the violence firsthand. Alice Harris in particular was so important because she had a camera.
The meddlesome Kodak that Leopold came to hate so much.
That's the one. She took photos of the victims. She took that photograph of the man named Nasala staring at the severed hand and foot of his little 5-year-old daughter. That one image is probably one of the most powerful documents in the entire history of human rights.
So Casement is there. He's interviewing people, taking testimonies. He's writing everything down.
He was meticulous. He was a great writer. He recorded the names, the dates, the specific injuries. He saw the boys with severed hands. He documented how villages that used to have 5,000 people now had maybe 500 because the rest had been killed or had fled into the bush to die of starvation.
And he puts all of this evidence into what becomes known as the Casement Report.
Published in 1904. It was an absolute bombshell because this wasn't just a journalist or an activist saying these things. This was an official British government document. It carried the stamp and authority of the Foreign Office. It confirmed everything Morel had been saying with firsthand, on-the-ground evidence.
The sources mentioned that the Foreign Office tried to water it down a bit. They got cold feet.
They did. They were afraid of a major diplomatic incident with Leopold, who was, after all, a European monarch and Queen Victoria's cousin. So they redacted the specific names of the perpetrators and the victims using only initials instead. But the content itself was so undeniably damning, it didn't matter.
So now you have this incredible team. Morel, the organizer and data guy in Liverpool, and Casement, the credible official witness. And they team up.
They met and immediately recognized each other as allies. They formed the Congo Reform Association, the CRA, in 1904. And this is really the birth of the modern human rights campaign. It's the blueprint for Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch.
How did they get the message out to the public? There was no Twitter, no TV news.
They used the cutting-edge technology of the day. They organized mass meetings in town halls across Britain and then in the United States. And they used magic lantern shows.
Which are basically early slide projectors.
Exactly. They would dim the lights in a packed hall and project those massive grainy images that Alice Harris had taken. Images of the severed hands, the flogged backs, the starving children onto a giant screen. It was profoundly shocking to the Victorian and Edwardian public. public. People fainted. People wept. It made the horror undeniable.
They also got celebrities involved. I saw Mark Twain on the list in our notes.
Mark Twain was absolutely furious about it. He wrote a brilliant, biting satire called King Leopold's Soliloquy. It's written from Leopold's own perspective, where the king is just complaining about the meddlesome Kodak camera that is ruining his carefully crafted reputation.
And Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes.
Conan Doyle joined the cause, too. He wrote a nonfiction book called The Crime of the Congo. In it, he called what was happening the greatest crime which has ever been committed in the history of the world.
So you have the most famous writers in the English-speaking world attacking Leopold. How did the king react to all this pressure? Did he just cave?
Oh, no. He fought back, and he fought dirty. He was a master of public relations, or what we'd call propaganda. He set up a secret press bureau. He bribed journalists in Germany, Britain, and the U.S. to write favorable articles. He tried to smear Casement and the missionaries. He claimed the hands were cut off because of native customs, or at one point, even gangrene.
Gaslighting on an imperial scale.
Completely. But the weight of the evidence, Morell's data, the Casement report, and those photographs, it was just too much. The public outcry in Britain and America became deafening. Their governments had to act.
So what was the end game for the Congo Reform Association? Were they calling for Congolese independence?
No, and this is a really important historical distinction. In the early 1900s, the idea of African independence just wasn't really on the radar for European imperial powers. They couldn't even conceive of it. The goal was something they called the Belgian solution.
What was the Belgian solution?
The idea was that the Belgian state, the elected government, the parliament, should annex the Congo from the king personally. They believed that if the Congo was a regular colony, accountable to a parliament, with laws and oversight and a free press, the worst of the atrocities would have to stop.
So they wanted to nationalize the king's private, murder-for-profit enterprise.
That's a good way to put it. And under massive international pressure, Leopold II was finally forced to capitulate. In 1908, the Belgian parliament voted to annex the Congo Free State. It officially became the Belgian Congo.
Leopold must have been furious to lose his personal prize.
He was, although he negotiated a massive payout for himself as part of the deal. And in a final act of spite, he had all the archives of the Congo Free State burned before he handed it over. He said, "They can have my Congo, but they have no right to know what I did there."
Chilling. Just absolutely chilling. But did the annexation work? Did the atrocities stop?
The worst of the Red Rubber Terror, the systematic hand severing, the hostage taking, that did largely subside. This was partly because of the new administration, but it was also, frankly, because the wild rubber vines were exhausted. The economy shifted more towards plantation farming and mining.
But the forced labor, the fundamental exploitation, that continued.
Oh, yes. The system of extraction continued. The racial segregation continued. The path was well and truly set. But from the CRA's perspective, they had achieved their specific political goal of ending Leopold's personal rule. They declared mission accomplished and disbanded in 1913.
I think Morell said the native of the Congo was once more a free man.
Which, with hindsight, was incredibly naive. But at the time, it felt like a monumental victory for human rights.
Now, this brings us to part 4. And this is where the story takes a sharp, tragic turn for Roger Casement. He's a hero. He's been knighted by the British Crown.
Yes, he was knighted in 1911 for his work in the Congo, and later in the Putumayo region of the Amazon, where he exposed almost identical rubber atrocities being committed by a British-owned company. He was Sir Roger Casement, a celebrated global humanitarian.
But just a few years later, he's being hanged for treason in a prison in London. How do we get from the palace to the gallows so quickly?
Casement's internal evolution during this period is profound. He began to see a direct connection between the suffering of the Congolese people under Leopold and the suffering of his own people, the Irish, under British rule. He was an ardent Irish nationalist.
He called it the Irish complication, didn't he?
He did. He came to view the British Empire not as the benevolent force that could step in and fix the Congo, but as another form of the same tyranny. He saw Ireland as a colony being exploited by London, just as the Congo was exploited by Brussels. His loyalties completely shifted.
And when World War I breaks out in 1914, he sees an opportunity.
There was an old Irish nationalist saying, "England's difficulty is Ireland's opportunity." Casement believed that if Germany defeated Britain in the war, Ireland could finally be free. So he did the unthinkable for a knight of the realm. He traveled to Berlin in 1914.
In the middle of the war, that's treason.
It's the dictionary definition of treason. He traveled via the US and Norway using an alias, James Landy. He went to the enemy capital to seek German support for an Irish rebellion.
What did he want for them?
He wanted two things: guns and soldiers. He had this idea to recruit an Irish brigade from among the thousands of Irish prisoners of war who were being held in German camps.
And how did that mission go for him?
It was a complete and utter disaster, a total failure. The German government gave him lukewarm support at best. They treated him like a useful pawn to distract Britain, nothing more. They promised him about 20,000 old, captured Russian rifles that barely worked, when Casement was asking for 100,000 modern rifles and artillery.
And the Irish prisoners of war, did they join his brigade?
They booed him out of the camps. They remained loyal to their regiments and to their comrades. They saw him as a traitor. Casement found himself totally isolated in Germany, realizing he had made a terrible, terrible mistake.
We have these letters from the archives, the correspondence between Casement and a German friend, Count Blücher. They give us such a window into his mental state at this time.
These letters are just heartbreaking. You can see a man unraveling. He's depressed. He's disillusioned. He realizes the Germans don't care one bit about Irish freedom. They're just using him. He writes to Count Blücher about the war itself. There's this quote, he calls it the scientific insanity called war.
Scientific insanity. That phrase really sticks with you.
It connects everything, doesn't it? He had seen the scientific exploitation of the Congo for rubber, and now he was seeing the industrial slaughter of the trenches in Europe. He wrote that he was sick to death of glory. He had lost faith in European civilization entirely.
And there's a mention of his diaries in these letters, too, which is ominous.
Yes, he writes to Countess Blücher that he stopped keeping a diary because he could not tell the truth, even to myself. This is a dark foreshadowing of the Black Diaries controversy that would be used to destroy him.
Right, these were the personal diaries the British government found and used to discredit him during his trial.
While Casement was in Germany, British intelligence broke into his old lodgings in London and seized his personal journals. And these journals contained very explicit, detailed descriptions of his homosexual encounters in the Congo and the Amazon.
And homosexuality was a serious crime at the time.
A very serious crime. The British government secretly circulated typed-up excerpts of these diaries to the king, to influential journalists, to the American White House. They wanted to ensure that no one would campaign for clemency. They wanted him to be seen not as a political martyr, but as a moral degenerate.
So the end of the line, it's the 1916, the Easter Rising is being planned in Ireland.
Casement knew it was going to fail. He knew the Germans hadn't sent nearly enough support. He actually traveled back to Ireland on a German submarine, the U-19, not to lead the rebellion, but to try to stop it.
He wanted to call it off.
Yes, or at least delay it. He was trying to prevent a useless bloodbath. He was trying to save lives. But the submarine rendezvous with the armed ship went wrong. He was put ashore in a small dinghy. He was captured almost as soon as he landed at Bannostrand in County Kerry. He was soaking wet, sick, exhausted, and completely alone.
And the trial was a foregone conclusion.
It was a show trial. He was taken to London, tried for treason at the Old Bailey. He gave a famous, eloquent speech from the dock, defending the right of an Irishman to fight for Ireland's freedom, but it didn't save him. He was stripped of his knighthood, and he was hanged at Pentonville Prison on August 3, 1916.
It is such a heavy, bitter irony. The man who exposed the crimes of Leopold's empire was executed by the British Empire for trying to free his own country.
It connects back to that whole idea of truth. Casement believed in the power of the written word to expose the truth. His truth saved millions in the Congo by exposing the system. But in the end, the machinery of empire, with its own definition of truth and loyalty, just crushed him.
So that's the history, the con, the terror, the reform movement, and the tragedy of Casement. But this deep dive isn't just about the past. We have to talk about the legacy. Part 5, The Long Shadow.
We have to look at the Democratic Republic of Congo today. It is a country of almost unimaginable natural wealth, cobalt, coltan, copper, diamonds, yet it is consistently plagued by extreme poverty and brutal conflict. And our source from Dalarna University uses this concept of path dependency to explain why.
Break that down for us. What is path dependency?
It's a simple idea, really. Imagine you're walking in a dense forest. Someone before you cuts a path. Maybe it's a bad path that goes through a swamp, it's dangerous, it's inefficient. But once that path is cut, everyone who comes after you tends to follow it because it's still easier than trying to cut a brand new one through the thick brush.
So Leopold cut the original path.
Leopold built a state that was designed for one thing and one thing only: extraction. An enclave economy, they call it. Resources flow out from the interior to the coast, and weapons and security forces flow in to protect the extraction process. The state doesn't exist to provide schools or hospitals for its people. It exists to facilitate the removal of wealth for an elite.
And when the Congo became independent in 1960, that structure didn't just disappear.
No. The new leaders, most famously Mobutu Sese Seko, who ruled as a dictator for decades, they didn't dismantle this house, they just moved into it. They call this neo-patrimonialism. Mobutu used the mining wealth, just like Leopold used the rubber wealth, to enrich himself and his cronies and to buy the loyalty of his generals. The path remained the same.
And the source mentions the crisis of 1960 and the assassination of Patrice Lumumba as a key moment.
Lumumba was the first democratically elected prime minister. He wanted true economic independence for the Congo. He wanted the nation to control its own resources, and that was a major threat to Western mining interests during the Cold War.
So he was removed.
He was assassinated within months of taking office, with direct Belgian and U.S. involvement. And get this for a gruesome postscript. Belgium didn't return his only remains, which was a single gold-capped tooth, until the year 2022.
2022, I'm speechless. They kept a man's tooth as a souvenir for 60 years.
A Belgian police commissioner kept it. It just shows the level of dehumanization, and it shows how long these wounds take to even begin the process of healing.
And this path dependency continues right into the modern wars we see today.
The thesis we looked at discusses the Rwandan genocide in 1994 as a critical juncture. The spillover of that conflict into eastern Congo completely destabilized the region, leading to the Congo Wars, which killed millions and are arguably still ongoing in some form.
And we see groups like the M23 rebellion mentioned in the sources popping up again and again.
Yes, the M23 rebellion, which flared up in 2012, then again in 2022, and is active again now in 2024. The source argues these are recurring replays of the same conflict dynamics. You have foreign interference, you have weak state control, and you have a violent fight over the control of resources.
Instead of rubber for tires, it's coltan for our phones and cobalt for our electric car batteries.
Exactly. The commodity changes, but the fundamental dynamic of extraction and violence remains stubbornly on the same path.
And politically, there was a hope that the 2018 elections might be a chance to break away, to forge a new path.
The source analyzes that as a missed critical juncture. The transition from President Kabila to President Tshisekedi ended up being a backroom negotiated deal that preserved the power of the old elite networks, rather than being a clean democratic break. The path was not changed.
This brings us right back to where we started. The statues falling, the war over memory.
The memory war, yes. We mentioned the Africa Museum in Tervuren, outside Brussels. For decades, that was a propaganda palace celebrating the benevolent Belgian colony. It had these heroic statues of Belgians protecting and civilizing the Congolese.
I've heard they've renovated it recently.
They have. They are trying to decolonize it. They've moved the most racist statues to a storeroom in the basement. They've invited contemporary Congolese artists to create new works to challenge the old narrative. But as the article we read notes, many critics call it a museum of compromise.
It's hard to tell the full story of a horror in a building that was originally built to celebrate the perpetrator.
It's very difficult. And the Repair History group is still campaigning, demanding the removal of all Leopold statues from public squares, not just putting them in warehouses.
And despite some recent expressions of regret from the Belgian king, the experts in our sources point out there has been no official state apology.
No official apology from the Belgian state for the specific atrocities of the Free State period. And why not? Because an apology implies legal liability, and liability implies financial reparations. We are talking about potential claims in the billions of dollars.
So wrapping this all up, what does this all mean? We've gone from 1885 to today, from the rubber vines to the cobalt mines.
It means that the command figures of history cast incredibly long shadows. Leopold's ghost is still present in the extractive economy of the DRC. And Roger Casement's ghost is present in the human rights movements that try to shine a light on it.
It's a powerful reminder that history isn't just a collection of names and dates in a book. It's a structure that we are all still living inside of.
And if I can offer a final thought for you to mull over, just think about that concept of truth that Casement struggled with so much. He found that the truth about the Congo, when written down and shown in photographs, was powerful enough to change the map of Africa. But the truth about the war in Europe, the scientific insanity, was a truth he couldn't bear, even to himself.
And the DRC is still fighting for the truth of its own resources and its own governance today.
Exactly. The archives are still being opened, the statues are still falling, the story is still being written. And understanding this deep dive, I hope, is just one step in seeing the architecture of our world a bit more clearly.
Well, on that note, we are going to wrap up this deep dive. It's a heavy topic, but an absolutely essential one.
Indeed. Thank you for walking through it with us.
Thank you for listening. Do not forget to click like and subscribe, and write your opinion in the comments section.